that put them into
Only that
got them under
they
fire?
no, only that they were all professional diplomats. None of them were Schedule C political appointees. None of them were Biden loyalists. These are people who had been in the State Department for decades, and Trump just wanted them all out. And so rather than fight, they quit.
And what do you think? How quickly will those people be replaced, and or can they be replaced, and will they be replaced with, I assume, Trump loyalists?
That's the conventional wisdom. They can be replaced quickly because there's always, a gaggle of people who are angling for those jobs. But they're normally jobs that are given to career diplomats.
Mm-hmm.
The undersecretaries can be political appointees, but usually they're political appointees who had been diplomats in a previous iteration. Mm-hmm. Bill Clinton, for example, chose retired diplomats to take those undersecretary positions. Mm-hmm. There used to be only three undersecretaries: political affairs, economic affairs, and administration. And now there are like a half a dozen. They were greatly expanded by Barack Obama. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say these are all going to be Trump loyalists now. He wants an America first, in air quotes, an America first foreign policy led by people he can trust. And I think that's that we're seeing the beginning of that.
How does that jibe with the obsession with China?
I think he's more concerned about Russia than he is about China. Today, he spent the whole day today talking about Russia and barely said anything about China. So I think, again, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think that he is going to defer to Marco Rubio on China. And I think that he's going to give Rubio his marching orders on Russia. I think Trump is far more interested in Russia.
And with Russia, is this how much of this, like Russia had better cut a good deal or else? How much of that is posturing?
I think almost all of it is posturing. I think what we're going to end up seeing in the end is what we've been saying for the last, 3 years, that the Russians will agree to at least a ceasefire, mm-hmm. but they will keep the Donbass and they will keep Crimea. Mm-hmm. And we're going to somehow present that to the rest of the world as a great victory for Ukraine and for democracy.
And will rump Ukraine join NATO or not?
No. I doubt it. No. I think that Ukraine will join the European Union eventually.
Right. Well, Putin said NATO. He's okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the European Union that wants to slow roll it because their economy is in tatters.
It's going to be very expensive.
Yeah.
And it would be good for Russia to have an EU nation at its border for trade.
Sure would.
And even on China, Trump was talking to Xi mm-hmm. before he was even inaugurated, right? Like that was big headline.
And Xi sent an emissary to the inauguration.
Yeah, mm-hmm. So I think we shouldn't forget that Trump does posture a lot as a negotiating tactic. Mm-hmm. I mean, in the most extreme example with North Korea, where we also had, you could argue one of the most extreme breakthroughs in foreign policy mm-hmm. that we've had for a long time.
Yeah.
So, right. Yeah. And, again, at the risk of, I feel like for the next couple of weeks, I may be credibly accused of having Biden derangement syndrome because I'm going to keep going back to but this guy was so bad too. But there's, again, a lot of criticism of Donald Trump for staffing this or that department with quote unquote loyalists, which is, not so far from what is normal anyway. But also this was a president who faced probably unprecedented leaking and covert and overt obstruction in his first term. Not that some of it some of it I agreed with, some of it I didn't agree with, as in, Pentagon, members of the military saying, oh yeah, we're slow walking all these orders to mm-hmm. To pull back troops. Mm-hmm. So, what do you expect to happen? If you have people, leaking about his administration, writing about how they're trying to work against his agenda internally, saying to the media, we're not actually following the orders of the commander-in-chief with alacrity. This is what you get.
8 years ago, I gave an interview to CNN. They called me and asked me to go on and talk about an offhanded comment that Chuck Schumer had made. Donald Trump said something that the media took to be anti-CIA. And Schumer said,
Oh, no.
I know, right? God, oh my God. And Schumer said, you don't want to mess with those intelligence people. They have 9 ways from Sunday to hurt you. And they went on and they said, what does that mean, 9 ways from Sunday? And I remember very clearly saying, what they're not saying is a repeat of November 22nd, 1963. That's not what they're talking about.
Right.
What they're talking about is the fact that these people in the leadership positions at the CIA have been there for 25, 30, 35 years, some even 40 years. And they've seen presidents come and go. And they know that if they don't like this president or any other president, they just slow roll it. The president makes an order. They say, yes, Mr. President, we're going to get right on that. And then they do nothing. And then when he asks about it 6 months later or 12 months later, they say, yes, Mr. President, we're on it. These things take time, Mr. President. And then eventually he's going to forget about it. And then eventually again, he's not going to be president anymore.
Yeah.
Well, this iteration of Donald Trump is already a lame duck. And so I think that they're just not worried about Donald Trump and about what he stands for and about what he's ordering them to do.
Interesting.
I don't like the sound of that, considering there are I hope we're going to have time to talk about all of the terrible things that Donald Trump is already doing and is going to do. But I would like for the CIA to not get in the way of some of the good things that he might try to do.
That's right. I couldn't agree more.
And I can imagine them leaking constantly to the press about how this is a national security vulnerability, or this is a threat to national security, or God we must not withdraw troops from Africa or whatever, and that's going to be really bad. That's going to,
it is, and this is a different Donald Trump. I think you guys would probably agree with me. The day after Donald Trump was elected in 2016, I was in a funk. I went to Starbucks that morning and a woman was crying and the barista told me, oh, you should have been here a half an hour ago. A woman passed out. She was so upset about Donald Trump winning. Yeah, it was ridiculous. People were nuts. It's different this time. It feels like Donald Trump learned a lot of lessons from that first term. He has a very clearly defined policy, or at least foreign policy, immigration policy. And Joe Biden was so terrible that I think most Americans, and there's a Gallup poll that was released this morning that confirms this, most Americans are willing to give him the benefit of the doubt right now.
He has a honeymoon.
He actually does.
I just wrote my syndicated column yesterday that I posted, and it was about how Trump is trying to grab a presidency of intentionality. And, we haven't really had an intentional president since Ronald Reagan. And that would be someone who, like, they get elected and they have a bunch of stuff they really want to do, and they're willing to work hard to push it through. And it hopefully has some sort of connective tissue that forms a coherent ideology. Reagan had that. With Trump, I think that remains to be seen, as you said, John, on domestic policy in particular. Yeah. But I do think it's exciting. I mean, we all learned about FDR's first 100 days. He came out of gangbusters. We're going to get Americans back to work. The federal government's going to directly hire people. We learned about that as kids, but we haven't seen much of that. We've had presidents who, as soon as they stick their hand up and say that they will protect the Constitution, they've accomplished pretty much 99% of what they wanted to do. They won the presidency. That's what they wanted. But after that, they're just managing. They're just tinkering. They're not. It's not like, oh, I'm rolling up my sleeve. I'm getting under the hood. I'm changing the engine out. I'm doing big things. Donald Trump feels like that, and whether you voted for him or you didn't vote for him, that's exciting, and excitement. The excitement of a movement, which is what Trump is in charge of, is a movement rather than a party. That has appeal, especially when people are unhappy and feeling that things really do need to change in a significant way. Yeah.
I think to, bring back a little realism, not that we were wandering away from it, but what I worry about, well, no, I mean, there are reasons.
What did I do? What did I say?
No. There are reasons to be optimistic. I guess to go back to what we were just talking about, though, what John was just saying, what I worry is that the things that I think the three of us are optimistic about, the possibilities that Trump presents that we would look forward to would mostly be changes in defense policy and foreign policy. And I think, unfortunately, the most powerful extra state, deep state, whatever, national security state forces will stand in the way of those, right? I think there are going to be major and powerful obstacles to making changes in those arenas that aren't going to exist for some of the other things that Trump wants to do, like make sure trans people can't use the bathrooms they want to use, changes in immigration policy, changes in domestic policy. And so that's what I worry about is, there are reasons, there are some important reasons to be excited about a Trump presidency if I think you thought he had a chance to implement all policies equally. But I think instead we'll just get, as John was saying, we'll get a lot of slow walking of any of the external stuff that we want, and we'll get drilling in Alaska and, a lot of sort of oppressive regulation about what sex can do this or what sex can do that, and reproductive rights restrictions and sort of pointlessly cruel immigration policies. And that makes me sad, right? I just I want to throw that in there as we're talking about what we're excited about, because I think realistically, those are where the obstacles lie, right?
Yeah,
True.
I want to add one thing.
John,
I'm
before
sorry. Go right ahead.
Before we move on to domestic, I want to do that. John, can you just clarify, can Trump do a purge of the CIA the way that he did at State?
Not directly. Well, yeah, that's not exactly true. The CIA is very unusual in that of all governmental entities, it's the only one that does not have civil service protections. CIA employees serve at the pleasure of the president. But no president has ever, en masse just wiped the slate clean. The only political appointee, normally, it was slightly different under Reagan, but the only political appointee is the director. Reagan picked a director and deputy director as political appointees, and briefly a deputy director for operations. But normally it's just the director, and then a career officer or an admiral or general is brought in as the deputy director. If he really wanted to, he could fire anybody he chose to fire. Now, Jimmy Carter believed that when Jimmy Carter was elected, he believed that the Senate and House oversight committees had not gone far enough in cleaning out the bad guys from the CIA. Commission. Right. And so Carter initiated something through Stansfield Turner, his CIA director, called the Friday Night Massacre, where 25% of the CIA's covert operatives were fired. Many of them just months away from qualifying for their pensions.
Oh man.
They still hate Jimmy Carter and Stan Turner for doing that. In fact, the very first briefing I ever did when I was a brand new CIA officer was of Stansfield Turner. He came back to the agency because he had gotten 2 free tickets on a cruise ship. And it was in exchange for giving lectures each night of the cruise. And he wanted a briefing on democracy movements in the Persian Gulf. And as I was leaving the office in my best suit to go brief, Stansfield Turner, my first high-level briefing, my boss said, "Nothing classified." And I said, no, you're wrong. Former directors are allowed to be briefed up to the secret level. And he said, "Not Turner. We don't give him shit." And so I had to keep the whole thing at the unclassified level, which he could have gotten just from the Washington Post. But anyway, if he wanted to, Trump could do that. He could do it directly, or he could do it through John Ratcliffe, who is going to be confirmed close to unanimously as the new CIA director. I don't think he will. At least there's no indication of that. But I will say that if he doesn't, it won't necessarily be because he doesn't want to. It'll be, I think, because of pressure from other Republicans. Tom Cotton, for example. I loathe Tom Cotton more than any other member of the U.S. Senate because he is the stereotypical, or maybe I should say archetypal neocon. He pretends to be a MAGA Republican. He's not. It's Tom Cotton, who wanted to be the CIA director in Trump's first term and was passed over. And then when the Trump campaign released the rumor, leaked the rumor that Amaryllis Fox Kennedy was being considered for deputy CIA director. And remember, she was a CIA veteran. It was Cotton that killed it. We don't know why. Did he want to be the deputy CIA director? Who knows? But if the likes of Cotton decide that Trump is making mistakes at the agency or is doing something at the agency that he doesn't like, it's those Republicans like Tom Cotton that are going to step in and change things. Mm-hmm. Scary.
I want to say on the topic of security clearances, I did find it very satisfying that Trump revoked the security clearances of those dozens of former officials who signed the Hunter top letter.
That's awesome.
I've written about that so many times, and I wrote about it again yesterday. It's going to be released tomorrow. I agree with Trump 1,000% on this. The likes of John Brennan and Jim Clapper and any of these other clowns, Mike Morrell and Mike Hayden and all these other idiots, they should not have security clearances if they are then running to MSNBC and CNN telling us what to think about issues and saying, well, listen, if you knew what I knew, if you could see the reporting that I see, you would know that you should be with me. Screw that. That's the propagandization of the American people.
Not to mention the fact that we know there is a revolving door between intelligence officials, Pentagon officials, whatever, and then lobbying for foreign governments and working for foreign governments.
That's exactly right.
I don't understand why anyone more than a handful of people who you specifically want to have on as a team of advisors should retain security clearance.
That's right. That's right.
It's so silly. Should we get to pardons?
Yeah, let's get to pardons.
All things domestic. Let's do it.
Another thing that's been weighing on me for quite some time.
Yeah, it's just sorry. I don't want to trigger you, John.
I'm already triggered. I want to punch Joe Biden in his wrinkled up old face.
I have to say, okay, we talked about this. I was like, oh man, I want to go do a review of James Biden. I'm so angry of Biden issuing like blanket pardons in the last 20 minutes of his term. To 5 different members of his family. They cover a period of 10 years, more than 10 years. And it's disgusting. And I thought I'll just go and review the sort of shady history of James Biden as one example. I spent hours reading about James Biden and could not even get close to giving you a summary of the shady dealings he's done. I want to give you one. I started with one example of this hedge fund that he and Hunter set up. And in this one business venture, there were 2 lawsuits, one dismissed and one settled, where potential partners accused Hunter Biden and James Biden of cutting them out, making a deal with them, and then illegally cutting them out of the deal. There were 2 connections to 2 individuals who were later either one was named an unindicted co-conspirator, the other was convicted of historically large Ponzi schemes or securities fraud. Like the hedge fund for a hedge fund they made in collaboration with this other brand was exclusively marketed by a guy who was years later. He was at the time around the time began to be investigated and was later convicted of running an $8 billion Ponzi scheme and sentenced to 110 years in prison. It's just the sheer volume of shady dealings. You could write a book about this. He's getting loans that he otherwise wouldn't have gotten because he doesn't have anything to back them up. He's getting them on his brother's name. He's obviously influence peddling, right? He's doing that constantly. Mm-hmm. And he is, there are 2 separate investigations into a hospital chain, AmeriCorps, that he was involved in, that he had contracted to help promote. There's an investigation in Pennsylvania, and then there's an investigation in Florida. And James Biden is on the periphery of these investigations, right? In Florida, it's because he seems to have been paid with funds that were embezzled. I think the guy who paid, I think that is sort of a done deal. The question is whether James Biden knew that he was being paid within embezzled funds. Mm-hmm. And in Pennsylvania, it's sort of pretty straightforward Medicare fraud. But like, there are very, very legitimate reasons to be investigating James Biden right now. There have been for decades, and it is indefensible for Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden, I feel like by all rights, this should be the nail in the coffin of the Democratic Party, to have their corpse wander out of the White House, having just decided that his family is allowed to do whatever petty criminal thing they've wanted to do for a period of a decade, and you can't investigate them. It's so gross. The idea that, that James Biden could possibly be triggered or targeted for political retribution. Now, you can say that some of the investigation into Hunter was because of his father's position, right? Mm-hmm. And that maybe somebody else would not have been brought up on that like form charge for
the gun thing.
But I think you could also probably say that Hunter got away with a lot of shit that not somebody else who wasn't named Biden wouldn't have gotten away with.
That's right.
I mean, I think he doesn't have as long a trail of financial devastation as his uncle does, but that's just because he's half his age.
That's saying a lot, though.
I mean, it's like, these guys, there has been, and I would predict there will be, plenty of reason to look into these guys' business.
And Jim Biden's still vulnerable for state charges, right?
I guess so.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he's not really in the clear.
And I do think it's important to point out, like, the evil dictator Donald Trump, who wants to fill the White House with loyalists and wants to, whatever, target his enemies personally, blah, blah, blah. He didn't do any of this on his way out. He didn't do blanket preemptive pardons for people. He didn't. I mean, I went through the list, right? And there were a couple of people who he did pardon before, like he pardoned Bannon before Bannon's trial could get underway. But he pardoned him for a specific offense. Those were all for specific offenses, not for whatever you did between 2014 and 2024.
And Bannon ended up going to prison anyway for contempt of Congress.
He did. What about Fauci and Liz Cheney?
Yeah.
I mean, what is there to say, right? Like, I think the Fauci situation is complicated. I have abandoned a lot of hope of getting in the next decade what could possibly feel like an honest reckoning of COVID, because it's just because China is involved, the issue is so politicized. Liz Cheney, I mean, I don't know. I guess I think it's probably silly. I mean, I do think also, however, Trump has promised to go after enemies.
Out of curiosity, I don't know how this works. So let's say Congress decided they wanted to investigate either of these two. Would these pardons put that? They'd still have to testify, right? They're still vulnerable to a subpoena, right?
Yeah, they're still vulnerable to a subpoena. That's right. They couldn't be. But you know what? The thing is, they couldn't be charged anyway. They couldn't have been charged even without the pardon, because they have congressional immunity. They were carrying out their duties as an elected member of Congress. Now, if they had held these hearings and committed a crime while Congress was not in session, then they could have been charged. But because this was an official act of Congress, they were acting in their official roles as elected representatives, they couldn't have been charged with a crime anyhow.
But Cheney, the brief against Cheney was that she witness tampered, right?
But even if she had witness tampered, she couldn't have been prosecuted because she did so in the course of carrying out her congressional duties.
It seems like a perversion of her congressional duties.
Oh. Sure. Well, just like if Congress is in session and you get drunk and you drive to Congress to vote and you get pulled over for DUI, they can't charge you. because you're getting to Capitol Hill in the furtherance
Isn't
of
that
your
kind of what
official
happened
duties.
to one of the Kennedy congressmen at one point? Like, remember
I wouldn't be surprised
Patrick
at
or
all.
someone like that? I forget which
yeah.
Kennedy.
Yeah.
I would, knowing nothing about this story, I would bet $5 on the answer being yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's in the mists of the 80s for me. I think that
Yeah.
happened. Yeah.
I mean, I don't have. I obviously I am furious about Joe Biden protecting his grifting, lying, dodgy family on his way out.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm
I don't know
not
that-
furious about it. What I'm furious about is that no Democrat will confront it
Not
and
a single one.
and say that it changes their mind about their view of the Democratic Party or of Joe Biden.
That's right.
What gets me. It's the fact that he's a scurrilous dog is not, that's known to me, and I think to all three of us. Like, but you know, the fact that like he's a scurrilous dog and no one's going to admit it, it's gross.
That's what I mean. I hope it's the end of this party. I really do. I'd like another opposition. I know. Well, also, but we're all saying things that we hope that aren't going to happen here, Ted. I mean, the question I was going to ask is, does it make us sort of rethink the pardon power of the president? Because it is a little bit odd.
It's a big question.
I don't feel I know, John.
Well, it requires a major constitutional amendment, right? I mean,
yeah, that's the thing. You'd have to amend the Constitution.
And we can't amend the Constitution to anything. We can't even amend the Constitution to say that women are equal.
And listen to how hard it is to amend the Constitution. You need 3/4 of the state legislatures to vote 2/3 majorities
each
to change the Constitution. And then once 75% of the state legislatures vote by 2/3, then it goes to Congress. And the House and the Senate has to vote with 2/3 majorities. Ain't going to happen.
I don't think you could amend the Constitution to, ban the common cold. I mean, they just can't. There's no way this country can agree on anything to that extent anymore.
Well, Trump is trying to do it with birthright citizenship.
Yeah.
Well,
so not going to happen.
The effect there is just going to be to put money in the pockets of immigration attorneys, right? I mean, because basically, it's unconstitutional. So if your birthright citizenship is revoked under the Trump rule, you sue, and it it's got to go up to SCOTUS at some point. 5 years from now, SCOTUS finally deals with it, and all of that stuff gets reversed.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it right there.
It's the ABA Full Employment Act.
Hey, can I jump back to pardons for 1 second?
Sure.
Trump was under pressure from a lot of Republican senators to not pardon any of the January 6th prisoners who had who had committed acts of violence. He gave them the big middle finger, and he pardoned everybody, including Enrique Tarrio from the Proud Boys, all these guys, the ones that that shot cops with stun guns, and pardoned everybody. Bear spray, exactly. Metal poles, and nobody's really saying anything. Nobody has the guts to say anything about it. In fact, John Thune, the new Senate Majority Leader, told Politico this morning that he prefers to look forward, not backward. Remember that?
That's what
CIA torture.
Yes, exactly.
That's right. Yeah. You said the same thing. Well, we're talking about 1,600 people, one of whom has already been rearrested on a gun charge today. But 1,600 people in one fell swoop. That's dramatic. It's unbelievable. Even more important in my mind, Donald Trump promised the family of Ross Ulbricht that he would pardon Ulbricht on his first day in office. And that is exactly what he did.
You should tell people who he is.
Ross Ulbricht was the founder of Silk Road. It was a website on the dark web where you could buy weed or buy meth or buy,
then it turned out human beings and
prostitutes.
Right. Yeah. Um, I don't know Ross Ulbricht, but I do know his mother and his sister. And they're the first ones to say he's autistic, in that he's one of those people with autism who tests at the genius level,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so he created Silk Road because he is a firm believer in free enterprise. He's an ardent libertarian, and he just didn't think through the consequences of hosting a platform where illegalities, would routinely take place.
Mm-hmm.
He got something like 110 years in prison.
2 life terms plus 40 years.
Yeah,
That's
which
what
is,
it was. Yeah.
I think,
2
awful.
life terms plus more than 110 years. I met his mom and his sister a handful of times at different whistleblower events. And there was a very, very well-oiled sort of machine out there, akin to what we saw with Julian Assange, to get a pardon for Ross Ulbricht. And he had the strong support of people like Rand Paul and Ron Paul and Thomas Massie. And they were able to get to Donald Trump in the last couple of years. And Trump said on day one, I'm going to pardon him. And he did. He's home right now with his family.
Yeah.
So I mentioned this to a friend of mine who happens to be a former chairman of the Texas Republican Party. And he had the most interesting analysis. We talked about this last night, right after the pardon was announced. And he said, Trump is issuing the most controversial of the pardons right now because Republican senators have been questioning Pam Bondi. Well, what's your view of pardoning this guy? What's your view of pardoning that guy? And she's having to do this dance to try not to alienate Republicans, because she needs the Republicans, of course, to be confirmed as Attorney General. And so if you pardon the most controversial people that you intend to pardon right now, before she becomes the Attorney General, then she doesn't have to worry about it on the floor of the Senate. And that's why we're seeing these really high risk, very public cases coming up for pardons. And I think we should expect to see this for another week or so.
That's super interesting.
I thought so too.
I'm looking back at the Ross Ulbricht charges. So they charged him with all of this, computer stuff, hacking stuff, whatever. And then they indicted him in some cases, and in other cases introduced evidence, but didn't indict him on allegations that he paid to have a bunch of people killed. Do you remember this?
I do remember.
Which is, I'm curious. It's interesting to me that, it's one of these things they indicted him on one charge. I think they introduced evidence that he had participated in some murder for hire scheme to kill 5 people, but I don't think they ever indicted him. They never invited to charge it. Yeah. So is this a kind of a trick?
I remember that. And I remember his defense was that, we all say, I should kill you. I'd like to kill you. Mm-hmm. Like my dad would jokingly say, why I oughta. Well, that didn't mean he was going to punch me.
The honeymooners, straight to the moon, Alice.
A real fan of the honeymooners.
Yeah.
Exactly. So his defense, Ross Ulbricht's defense was, come on, everybody says that. I was never serious. No money ever changed hands. I wasn't going to kill anybody. There were emails that, if taken individually or out of context, might lead somebody to believe that there was a plot if they were looking for a plot. But that's why he wasn't actually convicted of those threats.
They didn't even try.
No, they didn't.
They just sort of brought in the evidence.
But this is what they do.
Yeah.
They bring in the evidence, even though they haven't charged him with murder for hire, which is a 20-year charge, by the way. If you're just talking about it, you don't even have to kill somebody. If you just talk about a murder for hire, it's 20 years. Wow. But they didn't even charge him because they knew there was no murder for hire plot. Yeah. That's what they do.
I got to say, on the January 6th ones, and I don't know how you feel, Ted, I don't care. I don't care about, 1,550 of those cases, right? I really don't care. Even if you were bear spraying cops, you spent 4 years of your life in the U.S. judicial system. Like, I don't care about
Let's call it even.
But for Stuart Rhodes, who wasn't pardoned, his sentence was commuted. He was the head of the Oath Keepers, and it was his organization that was accused of, and they were found guilty. He was found guilty of seditious conspiracy. They were the ones who had weapons, right? They brought a bunch of weapons to a Virginia hotel room. Not enough weaponry to overthrow the U.S. government. You know what I mean? But weapons, more than you would need to provide protection to Roger Stone, which I think was their explanation. And then, Enrique Tarrio, who got the longest sentence, who wasn't at January 6th, but that was only because he'd been arrested 2 days before for defacing a church and burning a Black Lives Matter sign.
Right.
I do think, I don't think that my cosplay got out of hand is really an adequate defense. I don't think they should have been charged with terrorism. Some guy was charged with terrorism, one of the Oath Keepers, because he moved a fence and let people into the Capitol. That's ridiculous to me. But I think the vast majority of people were in a protest that got unruly and then violent and destructive. There had been a year or so of protests that had been destructive in that country in 2020, right? It was a year. There were a lot of protests, a lot of them for causes that I think we would agree with, but I don't think you can say that, property wasn't damaged. And so, that's
a whole police station I guess it was a closed police station that
burned down.
It burned to the ground.
Although a lot of questions, I guess, about who started that fire, which I'm always open to, right? And a lot of police making finding flower pots and saying this is a missile, whatever. Here's a can, it's a weapon, whatever. A lot of bullshit. But I think I don't care at all about punishing most of the people who were there, who wandered into the Capitol, that broke a window. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck. But I do think I think it would be silly. I think it's dangerous and silly to look at people who are cosplaying to the extent that they have uniforms and ranks and weapons and say, I'm a doofus isn't an adequate defense.
Right.
I don't think they necessarily should have been, I don't think that they should have had the kind of charges stacked that they saw. I think we have insane sentences in this country. I think there are very few things for which you should actually lose the rest of your life.
Very few.
Computer hacking, very few. And I'm not even, I don't know, you want to commute Stuart Rhodes' sentence? I don't know, maybe seditious conspiracy should get a little more than 4 years. But pardoning Tarrio.
That was the worst. You and I talked about this when we had our old show. I have a personal beef with Tarrio because not necessarily because he went into town and burned a Black Lives Matter flag. Yeah, that's kind of a dick thing to do, but
whatever.
Get 30-something years in prison for it. My beef with Tarrio was that for the previous X number of years, he was a rat for the FBI. And he was ratting out all of his friends, all of his colleagues. And I remember saying on our show that it was satisfying to me that once he got to prison, he was going to have to sit with the pedophiles in the cafeteria because the rats and the pedophiles have to sit together. And you know what? Now he's free, but at least there was that nugget of satisfaction that he was outed for the scumbag that he is, for ratting people out to the FBI.
I mean, go ahead, Ted.
Go ahead. Well, unfortunately, being an FBI informant is not against the law. But I take your guys' point. I think that this, but I have to say, if I was Trump and I was inclined to do these pardons, and I probably would have been, I think he deciding not to split the baby in any way, shape, or form was probably the right move, because then what he's making is a clear statement about overcharging and how the Democrats, they gilded the lily on this. They went too far. They were ridiculous. I remember biking along the Hudson River one day and looking up and seeing a giant electric, TV billboard over the West Side Highway with pictures of people wanted for trespassing in the Capitol on January 6th. Call this number if you've seen this schlump. And I was like, this is ridiculous. They didn't have posters like that after Brian Thompson was executed on the street of New York. So, I mean, to me, it's just sort of, they went too far. Michelle, it's what you said. The sentences are too long. Yeah. They overcharge in this country. They always lard on a ridiculous, 50. If you double parked while you were robbing the bank, they charge you for that. They charge you for blocking the hydrant. I mean, it's just like. So I think this is it's an extreme response to an extreme situation, I mean, the Democrats really they just went too far over the last 4 years with all the legal attacks on Donald Trump. Donald Trump, right now, Kamala Harris would be president of the United States if the Democrats had not gone for the whole overcharging conspiracy against Trump. I mean, it caused people to relate to him and take this little Lord Fauntleroy real estate racist billionaire and be able to make him look like a victim of the system, like an outsider.
Yeah. And now he is in power to do, I mean, I don't know, we don't have that much time left. The other thing we wanted to talk about was a couple of these executive orders. And yeah, I mean, the things he's trying to do, the like cruelty of some of his immigration moves right now, like not resettling refugees who have already been cleared, who have waiting for years. They've just stopped that. I mean, maybe
turning off
after
the app
this
of
review,
people who have appointments already.
Yeah, through the CBP1 app, like that's just cruel on a human level. Nobody should celebrate that. Even if you want to wind down these programs, sure, you were elected to do that. But to just reverse course on individual human beings who were doing what they were supposed to do is just awful.
The town of Huntington Beach, California, which is just south of Los Angeles, the town council voted today to make itself an
anti-sanctuary city.
Sanctuary city.
Yes, oh my God! What is that?
Yeah.
That's insane.
We just arrest anyone who's not white.
Yeah, seriously.
Maybe some white people too, just for good measure.
There's supposed to be. Trump had said that there would be immigration raids in Chicago this week. We haven't seen those raids yet, but I read an article in the Chicago Tribune this morning saying that the area of town called Little Mexico, they have a fantastic Mexican art museum there, but it's a ghost town. Usually, it's hustling and bustling with business. It's just empty. People are in hiding, and the administration arrested 377 undocumented people with minor criminal charges pending against them today to expel them immediately. So it's begun. It's not the massive raids we were expecting, but it's certainly begun.
And this petty garbage about, like this is the stuff that's going to be allowed to go through. And there's, there are a bunch of orders. The energy emergency, I think, is, that has some really dangerous language in it as well. This petty shit about gender, So now what? You're going to try and make people, can't pick what they want to pick on their passports. They can't use bathrooms in federal buildings. I mean, some of it is, it is. It's dumb. It's cruel. But this is the stuff that he is going to be allowed to do, whatever you feel about. I mean, I think there does need to be. I think there's room for some nuance in conversations about single sex spaces when it comes to women. But there's, that's a little bit of nuance. You know what I mean? Not people shouldn't be allowed to use bathrooms. People shouldn't be allowed. I mean, what benefit is it to force someone to check M on their passport if when you're looking for that person, they're going to have long hair and be wearing a dress and makeup? You know what I mean? Like, it's not actually helpful. It's just humiliating. And that is the stuff that I feel like is going to be allowed while, international trade and the state security apparatus and the military industrial complex are going to get in the way of anything potentially good.
Yeah.
And there's no opposition I mean,
No.
Democrats are despondent and waiting to see if they can figure out some kind of angle to oppose this administration, and they're completely, wrecked. And then there's no organized left whatsoever, at all. So there were no significant protests on Inauguration Day. There's no way to channel that. I mean, this is of course where if I were advising Trump, I'd say, you were elected president a second time because the Democrats overreached. Beware, you can overreach too, and and it could bite you in the ass just as easily.
Yeah, the lessons the Democrats seem to have learned is to go, oh, well, maybe trans people don't exist and we don't like immigration either. That's all, that seems to be it. And they're like, I don't know. I know we don't have a lot of time today. I was looking through also the energy emergency declaration. And in it, there is stuff that's real. Like our grid is not in the shape that it should be, right? Like we saw what happened in Texas, which of course is disconnected from the national grid, whatever, but they had a freak cold snap and snowstorm and their grid absolutely failed, as we've talked about before,
as it did
right?
last time.
Yeah. I mean, and also if we are going to be, unfortunately, full steam ahead on AI, that's only going to make these problems worse. Like clearly we do need to upgrade our electricity grid. Clearly we need to upgrade that infrastructure. One of the things that I've always wanted to get to the bottom of is why homes in this country periodically explode because of gas leaks, right?
Yeah.
I would really like to stop that and find out if why do we allow this to happen, right? But in the midst of that, there's all this language about drilling and how you got to work with the Environmental Protection Agency to make sure endangered species don't get in the way of another pipeline and all of this other garbage. And that's what's going to be, that I guess is what the Democrats are also going to find that they are fine with as well.
Mm-hmm.
So wait, just to be clear, Michelle, are you advocating eliminating all natural gas?
No, I don't have a strong position on natural gas.
Right. Just curious.
I do feel like I have I've tried to find this, Ted, like at what rate do homes and city blocks explode in America because of gas leaks compared to other countries, and I couldn't find it. It just seems like that's a terrible risk, even though it doesn't happen very often, but it does seem to happen like at least every 2 years. At least every 2 years, somebody's house explodes. And, we know the state of our oil pipelines. We know that the permitting system for these extractive projects is garbage. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we could have a much safer natural gas system in this country. That's all.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that.
What about, you mentioned AI this morning on the news? We talked about this before we came on about the there's a plan to invest is it $500 million or $500 billion? I guess $500 billion into AI and basically funnel it from the U.S. taxpayer into the hot, sweaty hands of Sam Altman,
who,
at OpenAI,
as we all know, doesn't have enough money already.
Yeah,
and by the way, I have a beef with ChatGPT. If you go to ChatGPT and ask it who Ted Rall is, it will.
Yes, I remember talking about that.
It does not. Yeah. It will. I've been unpersoned. If it can happen to me, it can happen to you.
Oh, before we go, speaking of ChatGPT, we're also in for another round of these type of articles. This was from Axios, where it's like, we put Trump's speech into ChatGPT to see what his word choice tells us about his direction and his emotions. And we're back into the, I hate this shit so much. It's like, one, you're just sort of outsourcing your job as a reporter. Like, what do you think? You know what I mean? You were there. Also, maybe there's something other than just word choice to inform us about this. But yeah, let's put it in. Let's count the number of times he says this word or that word or the other, and then we'll tell you he's feeling optimistic and forward thinking, whereas before he was feeling rambunctious or whatever bullshit. It's so stupid.
Well, let's talk about the speech. I mean, it was the least inaugural of all inaugural addresses I've ever heard. It was just, to me, it was the usual Trumpian, stump speech, litany of grievances. Everything is going to be the best, the biggest, and so on. There was no attempt at soaring oratory, nothing.
Yeah.
No.
ChatGPT said Trump's rhetorical style shifted from grandiose and dramatic in 2017 to inspirational and patriotic. Ted, so I'm afraid you're wrong.
Clearly, if ChatGPT says it's true, but it won't say it to me.
No, it won't say to you. You don't exist.
They blocked my account too.
It hates you.
Well, no, it's because I criticized them.
Man. I'm not saying shit about ChatGPT.
No, you love ChatGPT.
I love it.
ChatGPT is your friend.
ChatGPT can be my new electronic boyfriend. Yeah. Oh, I'd like to get into some of this AI stuff in more depth in our next conversation. And I also want to look at something that we haven't seen Trump do very much on, but maybe we can expect is more moves or a more permissive attitude toward further restrictions of reproductive